Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we are going to discuss the news listed in the index presented on the screen. Time stamping for the same is given in the description box below. Let's begin our today's discussion. The first news appears on page number 8 in the lead article section. It says, Making Peace with Naya Pakistan. India should encourage people's initiative to forge a coalition of the willing. Now, this particular topic forms a part of GS paper 2 under international relations and specifically under India and its neighborhood relations. So in this particular article, the author highlights various concerns that needs to be taken into account when engaging with Pakistan, especially after the formation of new government under Imran Khan. So in this, the article highlights two basic aspects of false starts as well as control of deep state. In the concept of false starts, it says that although India on many occasions have engaged with the new government in Pakistan with peace and overtures, however, each peace initiative has led to a major crisis in relationship afterwards, such as Kargil war after the Lahore visit of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So in this, the author highlights that India should not fall into the trap of false starts and must treat the roads of diplomatic negotiation between India and Pakistan very carefully. Further, the article talks about control of deep state, where the author mentions that deep state in Pakistan mainly refers to the control of Pakistani army and ISI over political, executive, judiciary as well as the bureaucracy of Pakistan. So in this aspect, the author also highlights that India should be very wary of this control of deep state and must ensure that whatever policy for peace is being initiated is not controlled by this concept of deep state. So according to the author, this concept of deep state controls almost every single aspect of political activity in Pakistan, and this deep state is very much anti-India. So it is also feared that in times to come, this Imran Khan government may also get into the grip of this deep state, and this deep state may also maintain its strange hold on the new government formed under Imran Khan. So it would be very interesting to see how India and Pakistan go ahead concerning these two concepts of false starts as well as control of deep state. Since this particular news is in transition, so let us wait and see how the new government in Pakistan moves forward with its relationship with India. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next article appears on page number 8. It reads, For a shift in gear, there has to be a change from focusing only on managing natural disasters to improving resilience. Now this topic forms a part of GS paper 3 under conservation, environmental pollution and degradation as well as disaster and disaster management. Now you can see questions have been asked on both disaster management as well as urban floods. This was asked in the year 2016 as well as this was asked in the year 2017. The question asked was, the frequency of urban floods due to high intensity rainfall is increasing over the years. Discussing the reasons for urban floods highlights the mechanism for preparedness to reduce the risk during such events. So a similar question may be asked with respect to the recent Kerala floods. Further, a question was also asked on the havoc brought by tsunami. It said that discuss the factors responsible for concurrence of tsunami and its effects on life and economy. In the light of guidelines of NDMA, describe the mechanisms for preparedness to reduce the risk during such events. So we understand that urban floods has become one of the greatest cause for concern, and in such case, we have to look for preparedness. In this aspect, it says that recent floods in Kerala have shown how fragile our ecosystem is, and we have to act to ensure that the loss to life and liberty is minimized, and also that we do not change the ecology of an area to such an extent that it becomes fatal. So the important aspect here to understand is that somewhere the ecology of an area is impacted, and due to the impact of an ecology in an area, it might lead to loss of life. Further, in this case, the author highlights that the Madhav Gadgil-led Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel had also recommended that the gradation of Western Ghats into 3 eco-sensitive zones with restrictions or ban on construction and mining activities in these Western Ghats. So this is one way how we can preserve our ecology from being destroyed by through process of construction or even cases of mining activities. It says, however, the state government did not find the report acceptable. The author highlights that India as a country is prone to disaster where 70% of our coastal area is prone to tsunami and cyclones, and also 60% of our landmass is prone to earthquakes and 12% of its land is vulnerable to floods. So we understand that these cases of disaster management becomes extremely vital from our exam point of view. In this aspect, it's important to know about the Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel, which was headed by Madhav Gadgil. In its report, it says that it designated the entire hill range as ecologically sensitive area, and it was classified into ecologically sensitive zones of 1, 2 and 3. So the first category of ecologically sensitive zones being of high priority, and almost all development activities including mining, thermal power plants, etc. were all restricted in it. So in the first category, all developmental activities were restricted, and also restricted making of new dams. Further, it talked about changing the approach of governance from bottom to top by empowering Gram Sabha, and it talked about giving more powers to local authorities through the process of decentralization, and in the process also suggested to constitute a Western Ghats Ecology Authority as a statutory authority under the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So all these were the suggestions of Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel headed by Madhav Gadgil. So in this article, the author highlights certain challenges that still remains, where the author expressed that risk management in India is still at the nascent stage of development, and here we resort to damage control rather than preventing the damage at the first stage. It then says we are far behind in terms of forecasting natural disaster. For example, Uttarakhand government has not installed any Doppler radars to provide early alerts about cloudburst and heavy rain even after the Kedarnath floods. Further, we have 5,000 large dams in India and only 200 of them have prepared emergency action plan. So we have to start thinking in terms of preventing damage rather than resorting to damage control. Further, the author highlights that the National Disaster Response Force has been plagued by lack of skilled people, and the institute performance in various projects like vulnerability assessment and mitigation process is far from satisfactory, or we can say it's not up to the mark. The author then highlights that for rural areas, disaster norms are even more skewed as government officials visit affected areas to decide the damage and relief. This generates an opportunity of corruption and misuse of power. It further says that people who are living in unauthorized areas get automatically disqualified from any relief in case of such disaster. So the government need to come up with a proper disaster relief plan, especially to those people who have become vulnerable to the natural disasters. The author says that in India, relief of policy is also skewed as each state and district have different costs for labor and construction. The author highlights that we must go for a planned urbanization which has the capacity to withstand disaster. For example, we should take certain inspirations from Japan from their various practices, as Japan is highly prone to earthquakes. Further, the disaster resource network should be institutionalized as a repository for organized information and equipment gathering. In this aspect, let's learn certain basic facts about disaster resource network. It says that the Indian Disaster Resource Network is a nationwide electronic inventory of resources that enlist equipment and human resources, and this is collected from districts, states and national level line departments and agencies. Now this India Disaster Resource Network is a web-based platform for managing the inventory of equipment, skilled human resources and critical supplies for emergency response. Primary focus of Resource Network portal is to enable the decision makers to find answers on availability of equipment and also human resources required to combat any emergency situation. And this database will further help the officials to assess the level of preparedness for specific disasters. So in this aspect, certain basic facts about Indian Disaster Resource Network becomes extremely important. And the author further says that this disaster preparedness should also focus on meeting immediate contingency and also to implement a conceptual long-term rehabilitation strategy. So we see this article on for a shift in gear becomes extremely important from our exam point of view, as questions in the mains examinations have been asked in GS paper 3. The next article appears on page number 9. The article reads, "Protecting the dissenters. India's constitutional democracy is predicated on people's right to call state power to account." Now this article is with respect to arrest of certain social activists on grounds of having a moist links. And this arrest has created a political debate on the right to dissent and also the right to ask questions on grounds of state accountability. So in this article, let us understand the concept of dissent, sedition as well as hate speech. This article forms a part of GS paper 2, specifically under governance as well as constitution. Now various questions have been asked by UPSC in previous examinations and prelims on the concept of rights as well as liberty. Now these two questions were asked in the year 2017. Let's go through them. Which of the following statements is correct? First, rights are claims of state against the citizens. Second, rights are privileges which are incorporated in the constitution of a state. Rights are claims of the citizens against the state. And fourth, rights are privileges of a few citizens against the many. Another question asked with respect to liberty was, which of the following objective is not embodied in the preamble to the Constitution of India? Options were liberty of thought, economic liberty, liberty of expression, and liberty of belief. Another question was asked in the year 2018. The question was, which one of the following reflects the most appropriate relationship between law and liberty? Options were, if there are more laws, there is less liberty. If there are no laws, there is no liberty. If there is liberty, laws have to be made by the people. And last, if laws are changed too often, liberty is in danger. So we'll find out the answer of all these questions after going through the discussion on this concept of right to dissent, sedition as well as hate speech. So in this particular case where certain social activists were arrested, the Supreme Court has observed that dissent is the safety valve of democracy. So we understand that the right to dissent or right not to agree becomes a very important aspect of any democratic institution. Thus we understand that citizens have a right to disagree with or denounce a state of affairs which is unjust or oppressive. Thus we can say that the pluralism of views and liberty to express any thought process within the constitutional boundaries can be said to be one of the salient features of our democracy. In this aspect, recently the Supreme Court has given a judgment on the right to peaceful protest, where the Supreme Court was hearing a petition with respect to ban of protest at the Jantar Mantar in New Delhi, where the Supreme Court recently held that the right to peaceful protest is a fundamental right guaranteed under Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and also said that this particular right to peaceful protest is also subject to reasonable restrictions as provided under Article 19 Clause 2, which is in the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India as well as public order. Further, while giving this judgment on right to peaceful protest, the Supreme Court observed that a distinguishing feature of any democracy is the space offered for legitimate dissent, which cannot be trampled by any executive action. So the Supreme Court emphasized on the concept of legitimate dissent and said that no executive action can trample such right of legitimate dissent. Thus, effectively, the Supreme Court recognized that legitimate dissent is a distinguishable feature of any democracy. So, while writing an answer regarding democracy, you can always use all these points to highlight what are the essential features of any democracy. Further, the Supreme Court in that particular case also observed that every individual or a group of individuals, whether they are minority, poor, marginalized, all of them have a right to express their dissent to government policies and also fight their own social circumstances. So in this news analysis, I'm trying to go through the previous judgment on right to protest because effectively the Supreme Court also held in that judgment that since right to peaceful protest is a fundamental right, hence right to dissent also becomes a part of freedom of speech and expression. However, such expression must be within the reasonable restriction as provided under Article 19 Clause 2. The Supreme Court further observed that these protests strengthen representative democracy by enabling direct participation in public affairs where individuals and groups are able to express their dissent and grievances, expose the flaws in governance, and also demand accountability from state authorities as well as powerful entities. As you know, that Article 19 provides for freedom of speech and expression, and the same article under Clause 2 also provides for certain reasonable restrictions on grounds of sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, as well as defamation or incitement to an offence. So on all these grounds, the government can place reasonable restrictions on our fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression. In this aspect, let's also go through the concept of hate speech, where the Law Commission of India in its report on hate speech that any speech which causes fear or incites alarm or also incites provocation of violence can be termed as hate speech and must be made a criminal offence under the Indian Penal Code. The Law Commission also observed that this hate speech can also be curtailed under Article 19 Clause 2, that is on the grounds of reasonable restrictions on public order, incitement to offence, as well as security of state. The Commission described hate speech as an expression which is likely to cause distress or offend other individuals on the basis of their association with a particular group or which incite hostility towards them. So, the Law Commission in its 267th report gave various opinions on this concept of hate speech and also said to make this concept of hate speech a criminal offence under the Indian Penal Code. Further in this article, we also hear about the word sedition. And section 124A of the Indian Penal Code has defined sedition, which says whoever by words, either spoken or written, or by signs or visible representation brings or attempts to bring hatred or excites or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government established by law in India shall be punished for imprisonment of life. So any charge under sedition provides for a punishment for imprisonment of life. So this is how the word sedition has been defined under Indian Penal Code. So in this aspect, it's important to note that in the Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar, a constitutional bench had ruled in favor of constitutional validity of this particular section of sedition. So this case particularly said that the provision of sedition is constitutionally valid. However, the court further observed that a person could be prosecuted for sedition only if his acts caused incitement to violence or tendency to create public disorder or cause disturbance of public peace. The court said that unless an act of a person does not incite violence or disturb public order, cannot be booked under the dangerous section of sedition. So in this particular case of Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar, the constitutional bench effectively ruled that only in cases where an act incites violence, has a tendency to create public disorder, and also disturb the cause of public peace, only then they can be booked under the case of sedition. The court further highlighted that any comments expressing displeasure against the measures of the government with a view to obtain their alteration by lawful means, without exciting or attempting to excite hatred, contempt or disaffection, do not constitute an offence of sedition. So this article on protecting the dissenters becomes extremely important from our UPSC point of view to understand certain basic facts about right to dissent, sedition as well as hate speech. Coming back to the questions asked by UPSC in the prelims, the question which of the following statement is correct? In this, C is our answer. That is, rights are claims of the citizens against the state. Further, which of the following objective is not embodied in the preamble to the Constitution? Here the correct answer is B, that is economic liberty. Economic liberty is not embodied in the preamble to the Constitution of India, whereas liberty of thought, liberty of expression as well as liberty of belief can be found in the preamble. Further, the question asked in 2018, that is which of the following reflects the most appropriate relationship between law and the liberty? Here B seems to be the most appropriate answer, where it says if there are no laws, there is no liberty. So we see this article on protecting the dissenters becomes extremely important from our exam perspective. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 18. The news reads, United Nations begins talks on treaty to protect imperiled high seas. It focuses on providing environmental protection to 46% of planet's surface. Now this particular topic pertaining to a treaty to protect imperiled high seas forms a part of GS paper 3 under conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, as well as under GS paper 2 under important international institutions, agencies and their mandate. In this particular news, the United Nations has started talks regarding a 2020 treaty intending to regulate high seas, which as of now lacks adequate environmental protection. Now in this aspect, 4 sessions will take place in the next 2 years. So this treaty is effectively to protect marine life and also to prevent cases of pollution in high seas. So as discussed, it says that the aim of the proposed treaty is to protect marine biodiversity and also to avoid further pollution of the oceans. So the important key points which are likely to be raised in the ongoing meeting would be pertaining to jurisdiction or areas which belong to no country will be taken into consideration. Further, it says that the focus of area will be that of high seas, international zone of marine waters, as well as their management. Further, discussions on creating protected areas in high seas will also take place. Further, sharing of research is expected on maritime resources, technologies, as well as environmental impacts. In this aspect, it's important to know certain basic facts about territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, as well as the high seas. It says that an area up to 12 nautical miles becomes a part of territorial sea. Further, an area up to 24 nautical miles becomes a part of contiguous zone, and up to 200 nautical miles becomes a part of exclusive economic zone, whereas beyond 200 nautical miles becomes a part of high seas. So this becomes very important aspect with respect to your prelims examination, that is the difference between contiguous zone, territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, as well as high sea. Now since this treaty is with respect to high seas, so let's wait and watch what this particular treaty in its upcoming session talks about with respect to protection of marine life as well as prevention of pollution in the high seas. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 1 and also as an editorial on page number 8. On page number 1, the news reads, US-India may not sign Security Pact at 2+2 meet, likely to merely announce an in-principle agreement. In the editorial section, it says that the forthcoming India-US 2+2 dialogue should usher in clarity about the defense ties. Now this 2+2 dialogue between India and the United States forms a part of international relations, specifically under bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. So the news on page number 1 says what's in store. It says that an in-principle agreement is likely between the two sides on COMCASA, that is Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. So one of the major initiatives of this 2+2 dialogue would be signing of COMCASA, that is Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. However, the news says that this agreement is unlikely to be signed in the upcoming 2+2 dialogue meet. Further, it says that the United States has said that the 2+2 dialogue is an important opportunity to enhance engagement with India. Further, in this respect, the US Secretary of State Michael Pompeo and Secretary of Defense James Mattis will travel to New Delhi on 6 September 2018 for this inaugural 2+2 dialogue. And it says that at the 2+2 ministerial meet, the US said it is looking to discuss how to operationalize India's status as a major defense partner. So these are some of the important issues which are likely to be discussed in the upcoming 2+2 dialogue between India and the United States. So the background of this 2+2 dialogue is that this 2+2 ministerial dialogue was established between India and United States, which will involve a dialogue between India's foreign minister as well as defense minister, which represent two on our side, that is India side, as well as US Secretary of State and the US Defense Secretary, which will represent the other two from the United States. Further, it says that India has similar 2+2 dialogue format with Australia and Japan, but this is held among the Foreign Secretary and Defense Secretary of both nations. As discussed earlier, that this particular dialogue intends to mainly focus upon US foundational defense agreements, mainly on COMCASA, that is Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement, as well as BECA, that is Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. Further, the dialogue also intends to focus on future implication of CATSA law, that is Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. Also, recent tariffs issues between India and United States, as well as the issue of US sanctions on Iran. So in this backdrop, let us try and understand what this editorial, that is retail therapy, has to talk about with respect to defense deals. The editorial says that the forthcoming India-US 2+2 dialogue will give more clarity about the defense ties between the two countries, that is India and United States. However, in the interim, a bunch of proposals worth 46,000 crore has been approved by Defense Acquisition Council. Thus, the approval of defense deal by Defense Acquisition Council, headed by the Defense Minister, is likely to boost defense cooperation with United States. In this aspect, one of the approval by DAC has been given for 24 multi-role helicopters, which has anti-submarine warfare capability and will be used by the Indian Navy. Another approval given by the Defense Acquisition Council is for 111 naval utility helicopters. The editorial mentions that the timing for these defense deals is important as it comes just prior to the dialogue. In this aspect, it's also important to understand that whether India is an important ally for the United States, or how does the United States see India as. It says that these defense deals affirms US strategy to strengthen defense cooperation with India, which is also reflected in the fact that US has elevated India as a major defense partner. And further, it is also allowed for simplification of licensing requirements to facilitate high technology trade. As per the United States National Security Strategy, which was released in December 2017, India is at the heart of the US Indo-Pacific strategy. And as per the strategy, US will try to deepen strategic partnership and also support our leadership role in the Indian Ocean security and the broader region. Thus, we understand that India is at the heart of the US Indo-Pacific strategy, and in this aspect, US will try to deepen strategic partnership and will also support our leadership role in the Indian Ocean region. However, despite strengthening of defense ties with US, there are some hurdles which still remains. One of the hurdle is that the strategic partnership policy itself needs certain policy clarity for its proper implementation. Thus, there needs to be certain clarity as far as the implementation of strategic partnership policy is concerned. Further, it says that India also must get clarity from US on its Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which could place certain limits on India's defense cooperation with Russia. So, India also need to get certain clarity on US CATSA law. So, the editorial also mentions about a way forward, where it suggests that India must retain its independent national security as well as foreign policy. Further, India must start thinking seriously about developing domestic defense manufacturing ecosystem by promoting suitable policies, and here the role of Make in India comes into picture. Further, editorial mentions that to aspire to be a global power and also provider of net security in the region, India must shed the tag of largest arms importer. That is, India must seriously think about manufacturing defense technology within the country. So in this respect, since this 2+2 dialogue meet is to take place on 6 September 2018, so let's wait and see what the two countries agree upon in the upcoming dialogue. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 8 on the editorial section. It says, risks remain. The spurt in economic growth is news, but the center must watch the fiscal deficit. So in this particular editorial, it is based on the GDP estimates of the first quarter, that is of April to June, for the financial year 2018-19. Now this GDP estimate highlights that even though the Indian economy has grown by 8.2% in the first quarter, the government must keep its eye on the vital economic indicators, failing which it would be very difficult to sustain this high growth momentum. Now in this aspect, some of the positives highlighted about the Indian economy in this particular editorials are the rate of economic growth in this quarter is fastest in the last 9 quarters. In this aspect, we can say that the economy has seen a remarkable speed of economic recovery in the last 4 quarters, which subsequently has been 6.3%, 7%, 7.7% and now 8.2%. So we can see that there is a remarkable speed of economic recovery in the last 4 quarters. Further, we can say that the growth is broad-based and has been driven by 8.4% growth in the consumption expenditure and 10% growth in the fixed investment. Further, the increase in fixed investment is particularly encouraging since it augurs well for future growth. Further, the growth is also attributed to a strong performance in the manufacturing sector, which grew at 13.5%. Now, this growth at 13.5% is extremely important because the manufacturing sector saw a decline up to 1.8% in the first quarter of last year. Thus, we can say that main reasons for higher growth are resolution of transition problems pertaining to GST, that is, Goods and Services Tax. Next, higher government spending leading to increase in gross fixed capital formation. Now, gross fixed capital formation can be referred to the net increase in physical assets or fixed capital, that is, net increase in fixed capital. As you can read, it says that gross fixed capital formation includes spending on land improvement, plants, machinery, equipment purchases, constructions of road, railways, private residential dwellings, and commercial and industrial buildings. So all these can be termed as gross fixed capital formation. So a higher government spending has led to an increase in gross fixed capital formation. However, despite this euphoria, there are certain challenges which still remains with respect to the growth momentum. Let's look at some of the challenges. The first challenge is with respect to fiscal deficit. It says that 86% of the budgeted fiscal deficit target for the current financial year has been reached within the first quarter itself. Now understand this like this way, that fiscal deficit is targeted at 3.3% of GDP, which comes to roughly around rupees 6.24 lakh crores. So of the 6.24 lakh crores, which is for the complete year, as of now, the present deficit has reached to 5.4 lakh crores, which is 86% of the budgeted fiscal deficit. That is, this amount 5.4 lakh crore is 86% of 6.24 lakh crores. So effectively, the editorial is trying to say that we are reaching the ceiling of fiscal deficit target very quickly, and this in a way reflects the risk of a higher inflation. And this risk of higher inflation can also be seen through the recent increase in policy rates by RBI. And this does not augur well for a sustained growth process. In this aspect, there are some other concerns as well, which remain as a challenge with respect to a growing momentum in our economy. These other concerns can be said to be decline in growth rate of services sector, next, increase in crude oil prices, decrease in GST collection, and regional variations in monsoon rainfall. So all these remain as a challenge in sustaining the growth momentum of our Indian economy. Now, a question was asked in the year 2015 in GS paper 3. The question read, the nature of economic growth in India in recent times is often described as jobless growth. Do you agree with this view? Give arguments in favor of your answer. So you see, question with respect to growth, its impact on the Indian economy, as well as the challenges which still remains for a sustained growth momentum becomes very important from our exam point of view. So this editorial which mentions about risks remain becomes extremely important from an exam perspective under GS paper 3. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 14. The news reads, financial savings are up but cash is king again. Financial year 18, deposits fell below pre-demonetization levels. Savers helped deposit rupees 4.7 lakh crore but added the same sum in currency. Now this particular news is with respect to the latest RBI data. However, this news becomes important because a question in the year 2017 was asked by UPSC in GS paper 3. First of all, let's go through this question and then we'll try to understand about savings. It says, among several factors for India's potential growth, savings rate is the most effective one. Do you agree? What are the other factors available for growth potential? So this question with respect to savings as one of the several factors for India's growth becomes important with respect to the latest RBI data. Let's understand what RBI has disclosed in its particular data. The important aspects highlighted in this particular survey is, in financial year 18, households went right back to hoarding cash in their mattresses. So in the financial year 2017, banks had absorbed 70% of incremental financial savings of households, or which was roughly around 6.3% of their disposable income. However, demonetization had forced people to deposit their cash in banks. The RBI report says that had this trend of depositing cash in bank continued, it would have meant more resources for lending to government as well as for the industry. So had this trend continued, then it would have led to more resources for lending to government as well as to the industry. But this trend did not continue, and in the financial year 2018, households went back to hoarding cash. In this aspect, it's interesting to note that the bank's deposit in financial year 2018 fell below pre-demonetization level. And the probable reason for this might be low interest rate on deposits or a shaking faith in the banking system, which may be due to either some cases of bad loans or certain cases of mega frauds. So the household money which was taken back from the bank further flowed into the sector of financial market. Hence, we saw a surge in the financial instruments as these financial instruments nearly gave a double-digit return. It says that shares and debentures was one category of financial savings that saw a significant jump in financial year 2018. So whatever money was hoarded in cash went to the financial market. It further says that different segments may have reacted differently to the falling rates as shares and cash groups both saw a rise. And also it talks about new loans, where it says that new loans taken have shot up from 2.4% of disposable income in financial year 17 to 4% in financial year 18. So all these data are with respect to the recent RBI data with respect to household savings. Since a question was asked in 2017, hence it becomes important to know that how demonetization impacted the concept of household savings and how people, after hoarding cash, transferred such money into the financial market. This news is a part of GS paper 3, specifically under Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. With this, we come to an end to discussion of today's newspaper. Please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for daily DNS updates. With this, let's move on to the question for the day.